Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ed Meese, hold the Ronald Reagan Chair here at the Heritage Foundation. It's good to see all of you, and it's particularly a pleasure today to be able to introduce a good friend and a great Attorney General already, even in his first year of being in office. Jeff and I have known each other for, over 35 years, since we were in the Department of Justice together during Ronald Reagan's time. As a matter of fact, Jeff Sessions was one of Ronald Reagan's first appointees as the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Alabama. And he is now, of course, the Attorney General, was sworn in as, I think it's the 84th Attorney General. I was the 75th, so it shows there's been a little water under the bridge since that time. But he was sworn in February of 2017. Vice President Mike Pence actually swore him in, but he was also one of the first appointees announced to the cabinet by President Trump in November of 2016. He's got a distinguished career in both the private practice, where he started after law school at the University of Alabama, and then was also an assistant U.S. attorney, and then, of course, later on was the U.S. attorney, as I mentioned, and then was elected as the Attorney General of Alabama, and then elected as the senator from Alabama until he was appointed to the current position. He has distinguished himself in many ways. He was a captain in the United States Army Reserve. He has always been active in professional activities. He is a man of great integrity, and certainly has indicated in his various positions, both in public service and in the practice of law, as an excellent lawyer. So we're very pleased to have him here at Heritage today, and please join me in welcoming Jeff Sessions.
Thank you so much, General Meese, and thank all of you here at Heritage for the work that you do to make this republic a better place, to help us preserve the heritage that is so unique and blessed we have in the world. One of the things you get to do when you're in the Senate and part of the Armed Services Committee, you get to go to places around the globe, and you know that you just can't take a constitution and give it to a country and expect them to be able to operate a rule of law. Nothing like the sophistication and the integrity and the stability of our legal system. It's just something beyond anything that's anywhere in the world, and if people don't understand that, they're missing something exceedingly important. General Meese was my boss, and it was a thrill to be a part of your Department of Justice. Ed Meese is one of the greatest Attorney Generals ever to serve in this nation. I know those of you who've come to know him know the qualities that make that such a true statement. He was fabulous. He's still loved in the department and throughout the law enforcement community. And General Meese, thank you for your friendship, support for me over the years. I'll certainly not forget that. President Trump spoke here a little more than a week ago. In eloquent terms, he talked about the legal traditions handed down to us that are the legacy of our founders. He spoke of the urgent necessity to, quote, rededicate ourselves to the defense of our God-given rights, close quote. And he has done more than talk. He's nominating truly outstanding judges to our courts who understand these principles. I'm very proud of his leadership, his judicial record, and to be able to serve in his Department of Justice. Many indeed think this election was pretty important. Without what's happening today, the rule of law may well have been lost behind us in a cloud of dust. It's a very significant election, I think, and many believe for the legal system particularly important. On the law, President Trump couldn't have been more correct. We must, above all, vigorously defend the inalienable rights that are part of our heritage, and especially religious liberty and freedom of speech. These are the very first freedoms the founders put in the Bill of Rights, and not by accident. They are first because our freedom to worship and to speak our minds are at the core of what it means to be free. Our founders believed that reason is the best means to truth and justice. Reason requires discourse and frequently argument. The father of our Constitution, James Madison, said in protest of the Alien and Sedition Acts, the speech codes of their day, the speech codes he said that freedom of speech is the only effectual guardian of every other right. In every generation, there have been those who say that certain speech is not deserving of protection. Many of these people are well-intentioned, but as Oliver Wendell Holmes once wrote, quote, "If there is any principle of the Constitution that more imperatively calls for attachment than any other, it is the principle of free thought, not free thought for those who agree with us, but freedom for the thought that we hate," close quote. When it was the Federalist against the Anti-Federalist, Lincoln against Douglas, Martin Luther King against George Wallace, and in so many episodes in our history, speech led Americans to better decisions and a more just society. Under President Trump's leadership, this Department of Justice is doing its part to protect that right. We will enforce the federal law and protect the constitutional right to free expression. For example, we recently filed a statement of interest in 2 campus free speech cases, and we will be filing more in the months to come. Incidentally, one of those cases arose when a college student was prevented from proclaiming his Christian faith. So this is doubly important because the restrictions impact both speech and free exercise of religion. The founders knew that religion is not an accident of history or a passing circumstance. It is an inalienable human right that it pre-exists the Constitution and is an essential component of liberty itself. And it's, thank you. In his farewell address, President George Washington famously called religion the, quote, indispensable support of political prosperity and a great pillar of human happiness. He warned, quote, "Let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion." It's a serious question. I would go further and suggest that a core principle of our founding was that there is an objective truth, and that good policy is to be founded on truth. And that is reflected from jury trials, cross-examination, rules of evidence, protections in free speech, protections in Congress, freedom of the press. All of this was designed to make sure that we reach the truth. Those rights that we have, it seems to me, were the protected mechanisms to ascertain truth. We had one Supreme Court justice that still makes the hair stand on my neck that in several speeches quoted favorably the line, something to the effect that there is no objectivity, just a series of perspectives. It's a dangerous thought. I don't think it's consistent with our heritage, our constitutional heritage. It was a faith and a belief in morality and truth that inspired Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. to march and to use the power of words to make this country better. He said, quote, "We must not seek to solve the problem of, close quote, of segregation merely for political reasons, but, quote, in the final analysis, we must get rid of segregation because it's sinful," close quote. It undermined the promise, as he described it, that each individual has certain basic rights that are neither derived from nor conferred by the state. They are gifts from the hands of Almighty God. Such concepts are a key part of our legal and cultural heritage. In recent years, the cultural climate has become less hospitable, sometimes even hostile, to people of faith and to expressions of religious belief. Many Americans have felt their freedom to practice their faith has been under attack, and I certainly have heard that in recent years. I believe the 2016 election was significantly impacted by this concern. It motivated many people. President Trump made a promise that was heard and well received. Since he was elected, the president has directed me to issue guidance on how to properly interpret and apply the protections for religious liberty in the First Amendment and other federal laws. I issued that guidance earlier this month. You can be sure the Department of Justice will defend those principles resolutely. The guidance makes clear that religious exercise is not just some policy preference, it's an inalienable right. We do not give up our religious freedom when we are at work, at school, when we interact with the federal government, or when we speak together in the public square. The guidance provides many more details about our rights, but I want to be clear about something. The guidance does not change law. No, the bedrock of our legal protections were put in place by our Constitution and the people's representatives in Congress. Acting on these principles, the Department earlier this week settled many civil cases with 87 plaintiffs regarding the previous administration's birth control mandate. And today, we announced that we settled 2 cases brought by groups whose tax-exempt status was significantly delayed by the Internal Revenue Service based on inappropriate data. It should also be without question that our First Amendment prohibits the federal government from treating taxpayers differently based solely on their viewpoint or ideology. There is no excuse. There's no excuse for this conduct. Hundreds of organizations were affected by these actions, and they deserve an apology from the Internal Revenue Service. We hope and believe this settlement today will make clear that the abuse of power will not be tolerated. These cases against the lawsuits against the IRS shouldn't have happened in the first place. They never would have been necessary if the government had acted properly. But this Department of Justice, we're going to continue to work on these issues. We're going to seek fairness and neutrality, and we're going to work to restore the rule of law in a lot of different areas. Let me mention a few of importance, but there are more than the ones I mentioned, sad to say. I have prohibited so-called third-party settlements. Under the last administration, the department repeatedly required settling parties to pay settlement funds to third-party community organizations that were not directly involved in the litigation or harmed by the defendant's conduct. I believe that when the federal government settles a case against a wrongdoer or a corporate wrongdoer, any settlement funds should go first to recompense the victims and then what's left to the United States Treasury, not to bankroll third-party special interest groups or the political friends of whoever is in power. The Constitution nowhere gives, think about it, unelected attorneys or their higher-ups the right to effectively appropriate and distribute funds to their chosen few. This is simply wrong. The department has also provided legal counsel to this administration in favor of ending several unlawful policies from the previous administration, including subsidies to insurance companies that were not appropriated under the Affordable Care Act. The law said they authorized to make payments, but there was no appropriations by Congress. The president doesn't have the power to appropriate money. Where did this ever get anybody's head? That is not a legitimate thing, and I'm proud that the president has put an end to that. And by the way, yesterday, Rachel Brand came in, Ed, and announced that the judge in the Ninth Circuit had a rule with us on that attack on the refusal to continue to pay these monies out. So that was a nice victory, even on the West Coast. The department has also provided a cabinet secretary also is not empowered to effectively wipe off the books whole sections of immigration law duly passed by Congress, especially when Congress considered it and refused to change the law as the official or the president may have desired. In fact, the DACA policy, in the DACA policy, individuals that were illegally here under current law not only were given certificates of lawful status, they were given work permits and the right to participate in Social Security. No matter what one thinks about the policy, our constitutional order is under threat when the legislative process is stiff-armed. Once again, President Trump put an end to it. The Department of Justice's Office of Solicitor General filed an amicus brief in support of a Colorado baker who was sued for refusing to bake a cake for a same-sex wedding. But as you know well, the First Amendment protects the rights to free exercise of religion for all Americans. Although public accommodation laws serve important purposes, they, like other laws, cannot be interpreted to undermine the basic freedoms guaranteed by the First Amendment. So that includes the freedom not to create expression for ceremonies that violate one's religious beliefs. We've defended and filed briefs for state voter identification laws, which has been upheld by the Supreme Court, and redistricting plans that we believe are perfectly legitimate. We responded to and are reviewing complaints from a coalition of 64 Asian American associations that alleges racial discrimination against Asian Americans in a university's admissions policies and practices. A university cannot discriminate against applicants based on their race. This is fundamental. And we are no longer allowing, and we're going to no longer allow state and local jurisdictions to nullify immigration law if they want to receive law enforcement grants. Well, I could go on and on. Thank you. I could go on, and there's a lot to do. But we are committed to following the will of the people. How is that expressed? It's expressed by the elected representatives and the laws they pass. But that brings me to a final point. How to preserve those rights. Our rights are best preserved by the structure of the Constitution the founders established. Most importantly, the separation of powers. Co-equal branches of government ought to respect one another as co-equal branches. And that means respecting their separate roles. As you all know well, some judges have failed to respect our representative in Congress and failed to effectively respect the prerogatives and responsibilities of the executive branch. One particularly striking example was a federal judge in Brooklyn who heard argument on a challenge to the federal government's wind down of DACA, which was generous. That is, in my view, plainly a straightforward question of law. But rather than address that question, the court said the government, quote, can't come into court to espouse a position that is heartless, close quote. Didn't say it was unlawful. Said, I think it's heartless. I don't like your policy, in effect. So with respect, it is emphatically not the province or duty of courts to say whether a policy is compassionate. That is for the people and our elected representatives to decide. The court's role is to decide and to say what the law is. A judge's comments on policy like this is offensive, and it's disrespectful of the legislative and executive branches, and to the fine attorneys in the Department of Justice representing the United States Department of Justice in court. Judges have a solemn responsibility to examine the law impartially. The judiciary is not a superior or policy-setting branch. It's co-equal. It has its role. Justice Roberts said, since the World Series is out there, you call balls and strikes and you don't take part in the game. You don't start favoring one side over another. Those who ignore this duty and follow their own policy views erode the rule of law, create bad precedents, and undermine, importantly, the public respect necessary for courts to be able to function effectively. This is especially problematic when district courts take the dramatic step of issuing activist nationwide injunctions. Forgive me for feeling strongly about this. Orders that block the entire United States government from enforcing a statute or a presidential policy nationwide, particularly when it focuses on national security. Scholars have not found a single example of any judge issuing a nationwide injunction of this kind, district judges, before the 1960s. But today, more and more judges are issuing nationwide injunctions and, in effect, single judges, which I did make the point, I'll acknowledge. One happened to be sitting on an island in the Pacific Ocean. Single judges are making themselves super legislators for the entire United States. We have nearly 600 federal judges, district judges in the United States, each one with the ability to issue one of these overreaching nationwide orders. Think about that. That makes the need for good judges who stick to the law even more important. A single judge's decision to enjoin the entire federal government from acting is an extreme step. And too often, district courts are doing it without following the law, and we think we'll be successful in the months to come. Exercising this awesome power because of a political agreement is certainly unacceptable. The Constitution gives judges no right to veto a president's actions because they disagree with him on policy grounds. So I'll close on a more optimistic note. The media focuses on decisions, and you've seen a lot of decisions that have gone against the executive branch in recent months. But we've also had, many of you may not have heard, some important wins. Numerous judges and 2 district courts upheld the president's executive order temporarily suspending immigration from certain countries. It was a reasonable order, certainly in my opinion, and lawful. But it takes one to rule the other way, and the whole nation is impacted. And the Supreme Court has now vacated both of the appellate court rulings against us. My lawyer said we're going to win in the Supreme Court, so maybe. The Second Circuit has also issued a favorable ruling in a case challenging the wind down of the DACA program. Although some district courts may initially rule against us, I'm confident in our positions and that they will be vindicated in the Court of Appeals and, if necessary, in the Supreme Court, because we believe we're right on this. The Department of Justice respects the separation of powers in all our work, and we follow the law as written in every brief we file and every argument we make. We urge the courts to follow the law in the same way. Whether the question involves religious liberty, free speech, or any other matter, this is what our Constitution demands. It's the best way to preserve our God-given rights. Thank you all. It's a great honor to be with you today.
We had hoped that we would have the opportunity to have a discussion, and Jeff, these people, most of these people here are part of a nationwide network of freedom-based public interest law groups, the CEOs and the chief legal officers who've been meeting here for 2 days. And so they particularly appreciate this opportunity. I must say they compiled a pretty good list of questions for you, but unfortunately, before.
What is my time? If you'll verify, we have the president's making an opioid announcement in just a little bit, so it's cut. I hope
Right.
they have more time, but we may
Well,
have a few minutes.
I understand, but, okay, I understand. I would suggest it's a good idea to be there when the president
I
wants you.
From one
That was
attorney general to another.
Jeff, you've done a great job,
Both
particularly.
of us were pretty early to meet with the presidents, weren't we? Not as early as you, Ronald Reagan.
You've done a great job of explaining how you've had to kind of clean up the mess that was left in terms of the rule of law, and you've done a good job of explaining that. But tell the group a little bit about what are the two or three primary positive priorities that you have for your tenure as Attorney General.
Did I tell this group, you get to hang a picture in the Department of Justice in your conference room, and the first one I chose was this one, just by the way. But one of the things, Attorney General Meese, that you and I have talked about, that I am so excited about, and that is we have tremendous unity within our state and local law enforcement. I don't think it's been the equal since you were Attorney General, and you were the most popular Attorney General with law enforcement in the history of the department, I suppose. But it's out there, and crime, after 30 years, it has declined. Murder rate a few years ago was half what it was in 1980, when I became United States Attorney. I remember that vividly. Crime had been going up steadily. General Meese was the expert. I mean, he knew the subject. He taught the subject. And so it took 20, 30 years, but the murder rate dropped by half. But in 2015, the murder rate went up 12%, the largest increase since 1968 in 1 year. Last year, it went up another 8%, 2016. Violent crime is up, and so we've got to get serious about it. Targeted policing, the program that we're talking about advancing is proven. President George W. Bush's program worked. We're going to improve it further, and the police are buying into this, and we work with them. 85% of law enforcement is state and local. So this partnership is the key to it. I'm really excited about that. I'm excited about reorganizing maybe some within the department, maybe getting more people out on the point of the spear, maybe in the U.S. Attorney's offices where the crime and things are occurring. The bigger your bureaucracy gets, sometimes the more difficult it is even to function effectively. And I'm proud of the team we're putting together. We support the president on judicial selections, on U.S. attorneys and U.S. marshals, and we're getting some really good people there. So those are some of the things that we're focused on. But we're never going to forget in anything we do that this heritage of law, we didn't develop it. They had jury trials in Massachusetts before the American Revolution. We had quasi-parliaments, House of Burgesses, and things all over. They know how to vote, how to have procedures and rules, and it's a blessing that we were given. And the last thing we need to do is have it eroded, weakened, both for business, sophistication. People come into Alabama and invest $1 billion from a foreign country. They got to trust us. They got to believe that there's a litigation. They can have a fair day in court. Somebody knows what the rules are, and it can be followed. They can afford to invest. So protecting the rule of law is exceedingly important to us.
Well, you've mentioned a number of things here. One of the things that you'll be talking about today with the president is this whole opioid crisis. explain a little bit about your plans in terms of the drug problem in this country, and particularly the opioid situation now.
We lost our poise a little bit here, our stability on it. People begin to say the drugs don't make a difference. But General Meese, we have never come close to 2015 having 52,000 people die as a result of a drug overdose. And last year it was 64,000. This is unbelievable. It's more than the height of the AIDS epidemic. It's more than accidents and gun accidents combined. And so we've got to reestablish first a view that you should say no. People should say no to drug use. They got to protect themselves first. But we're going after the drug dealers. The fentanyl people are really killers at fentanyl, and the police officers are even afraid to open a bag because they can die as a result of just the dust coming out of a bag. And so the president's going to announce strong policy in just a few minutes. I look forward to supporting it, but I do think that this whole country needs to not be so lackadaisical about drugs. And when you talk to police chiefs consistently, they say much of the addiction starts with marijuana, and it's not a harmless drug. But fundamentally, the big dangers, the big killers are the heroin and fentanyl and carfentanil and those kind of things. Cocaine, methamphetamine are all coming in record amounts. It's compact. You can smuggle it in because you can get a lot of dosage units out of meth, a lot of dosage units out of heroin, lots of them, 10 times as many or 100 times as many out of fentanyl. Get the same impact. So the challenge to law enforcement is really tough, and we're going to be working on that. And the president's given us the directive to work on it, and that we will do.
Jeff, I've just gotten the signal from your staff. I want to thank you on behalf of Heritage and this group for an excellent talk, and we wish you well. We hope we'll have you back during the course of your term, but we certainly appreciate what you're doing, and you can be sure that we will be supporting you in what you've outlined today. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.